Uncover Poirot's Secrets, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot reveals thrilling mysteries. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy clouds over Hunter's Lodge, casting a muted glow across the drawing room where the household was once again gathered. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the old manor held their breath, awaiting the next revelation in the mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. Captain Hastings, seated near the window, felt his pulse quicken as he watched Hercule Poirot, whose small, immaculate figure commanded the room with a quiet authority. The emotional outburst from Evelyn Carter had cracked the facade of the suspect's alibis, and Hastings sensed that Poirot was now ready to spring a trap. His little gray cells poised to unravel the web of deceit. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered to Hastings, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "The moment has come to apply the pressure, not with force but with precision. The killer is among us, and they will betray themselves if only by a glance." Inspector Japp, standing by the door with his arms crossed, nodded in agreement. "I'm with you, Poirot. That business with Redfern's cigarette case and Evelyn's outburst, it's shaken them up. Let's see who slips next." Poirot turned to the assembled group, his voice calm but resonant. "Mesdames et messieurs, the tragedy of Sir Reginald's death has brought us to a critical juncture. We have a burned letter, a misplaced key, a silent shot, and now a confession of sorts. Dr. Redfern was near the study at 11, a fact he concealed. But there is more to uncover, and tonight we will lay a trap for the truth." Lady Margaret, seated by the fire, stiffened, her silver hair catching the light as her hands clutched her handkerchief. "A trap, Monsieur Poirot? Surely you don't suspect one of us still?" Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "Madame, the evidence points to this household. Someone burned a letter to hide a secret. Someone moved a key to create a puzzle. Someone fired a shot that no one heard. And now, I propose an experiment to reveal the truth." Evelyn Carter, her auburn hair disheveled from nervous fidgeting, looked up sharply. "What kind of experiment? I've told you everything I know." Lawrence explained himself. He was in the library for a moment, that's all. Dr. Lawrence Redfern, standing apart, adjusted his spectacles, his face pale. "I've nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. I was in the library briefly, as I said. I heard nothing, saw nothing." Charles Wentworth, pacing by the window, stopped abruptly, his florid face flushed with irritation. "This is absurd. You're playing games, Poirot. I was in my room with Clara after 9:45. We've told you that a dozen times." Mrs. Clara Wentworth's pearls clicked as she nodded. "My husband speaks the truth. We were together all night." Miss Beatrice Lyle, her notebook open but untouched, spoke softly. "I was in my room after 9, as I've said. I don't see what this experiment could prove." Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Bien. Then let us test the truth. Tonight we will recreate the conditions of Sir Reginald's death. At precisely 11 o'clock, I ask each of you to return to your rooms, as you were on the night of the murder. I will remain in the study, and we will see what the house reveals. If the shot was silent, we will discover why. If the killer moved unseen, we will find how." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Lady Margaret's eyes widened, and she glanced at the door. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap, and Redfern's spectacles glinted as he shifted uncomfortably. Wentworth's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Wentworth's pearls stilled in her hands. Miss Lyle's pen scratched a single word, then stopped. Japp leaned forward, his voice low. "You're taking a risk, Poirot. If the killer's still here, they might try something." Poirot's smile was serene. "Let them try, Japp. Hercule Poirot is not so easily outwitted. The trap is set, and the truth will emerge." As the group dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the silent halls, Poirot drew Hastings and Japp aside in the library. "Mes amis, tonight is not merely a recreation, it is a provocation. The killer will feel the pressure and they will act. We must be vigilant." Hastings frowned, his nerves on edge. "But what if nothing happens, Poirot? What if they all stick to their stories?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Something will happen, Hastings. The human heart cannot resist the urge to protect its secrets. Watch their faces, their movements. The truth is in the details." At 11 o'clock, the household retired to their rooms, the great clock in the hall chiming with an ominous weight. Poirot, Hastings, and Japp took their places in the study, the heavy oak door locked as it had been on the night of the murder. The room was silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. Poirot sat in Sir Reginald's chair, his eyes fixed on the door, while Hastings and Japp stood by the windows, their senses alert. Minutes passed, the silence unbroken. Then a faint creak sounded from the hall, a floorboard, perhaps, or a door. Hastings tensed, his hand on his revolver, but Poirot raised a finger, signaling silence. The creak came again, closer now, followed by the soft scrape of metal against wood. Poirot's voice was a whisper. "Regardez, monsieur. The trap is sprung." The sound stopped abruptly, as if the unseen presence sensed danger. Poirot rose, moving swiftly to the door, his cane tapping softly. He unlocked it with the key from the lock, revealing an empty hallway. But on the floor just outside lay a single rose petal, its edges wilted but unmistakable. Hastings gasped. "The roses, Poirot! You were right, they're connected." Poirot knelt, picking up the petal with his handkerchief. "Précisément. Someone was here in the hall tonight, just as they were on the night of the murder. The roses have spoken, Hastings." Japp's eyes narrowed. "But who? And why come back now?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "To ensure their secret remains hidden. But they have betrayed themselves. The petal is fresh, plucked today. Someone has been in the garden, and they were not alone." They returned to the study, where Poirot examined the petal under the lamplight. "The garden, mes amis, is the key. The roses are neglected, yet the gardener was here. Someone used the garden to move unseen, to enter or leave the study. Tomorrow we will search it thoroughly." Hastings, his mind racing, gestured to the door. "But the shot, Poirot, how was it silent? And the key on the desk, how does it fit?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. The shot was silent because it was not what it seemed. The key was moved to create the illusion of a locked room. The petal tells us the killer's path. We are close, mon ami, very close. As midnight approached, the household emerged from their rooms, summoned by Japp's call. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and fear, but Poirot's gaze was unrelenting as he held up the rose petal. "Mesdames et messieurs, someone was in the hall tonight, just as they were on the night of Sir Reginald's death. This petal from the garden betrays them. Who will confess?" The room was silent, the accusation hanging in the air. Lady Margaret's hand trembled, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, Redfern's spectacles slipped, Wentworth's fists clenched, Mrs. Wentworth's pearls clicked, and Miss Lyle's pen froze. The trap had been set and the killer was cornered, but the final revelation was yet to come. As the night deepened, the mist outside Hunter's lodge thickened, cloaking the estate in secrecy. Hastings felt the thrill of the chase tempered by the certainty that Poirot was closing in. The rose petal was a beacon pointing to the truth, and the killer's mask was slipping. The trap was set, and the stage was ready for the final act. Chapter 10. The Garden's Secret. The dawn broke over Hunter's lodge with a reluctant light, the heavy mist of the Derbyshire hills clinging to the estate like a shroud. Captain Hastings, his nerves taut from the previous night's events, followed Hercule Poirot as they stepped into the rose garden, where the wilted blooms stood as silent witnesses to the mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. The discovery of the rose petal outside the study door had electrified the investigation, and Hastings could sense that Poirot was now on the cusp of a breakthrough, his little gray cells weaving the disparate clues into a coherent tapestry. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low as he surveyed the garden, "the roses have spoken and their testimony is vital. This petal, fresh and plucked, tells us that someone was here on the night of the murder, and again last night. The garden is the key to the locked room, and today we will unlock its secret." Inspector Japp, bundled in a heavy coat against the morning chill, joined them, his expression a mix of skepticism and anticipation. "I hope you're right, Poirot. That petal's a clue, no doubt, but it doesn't tell us who or how. If the killer used the garden, how did they get into a locked study without leaving a trace?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. "Patience, Japp. The garden is not merely a place, it is a pathway. Let us examine it with care." The rose garden, though neglected, was a maze of thorny bushes and gravel paths, bordered by a low stone wall that separated it from the study's windows. Poirot moved with deliberate precision, his gloved hands brushing the roses as he inspected the ground. Near the base of the study's windows he paused, his fingers tracing a faint indentation in the soil. A shallow groove barely noticeable, as if something had been dragged across it. "Regardez, monsieur," Poirot said, pointing to the groove. A mark, subtle but significant. Not a footprint, but a trace of movement. Something was placed here, or removed on the night of the murder. Hastings crouched beside him, puzzled. A ladder, perhaps, but the windows were locked and there's no sign of tampering. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Not a ladder, Hastings, but something more ingenious. The locked room is not impenetrable. It is a stage set to deceive. This mark, the petal, the silent shot, they are part of the performance." Japp scratched his head. "You're saying the killer got in through the window, but how?" "We checked the latches, they're secure." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the roses. "The window, yes, but not as you imagine. The roses, mes amis, are not merely decorative, they conceal a path, a method. Let us return to the study and test a theory." Inside the study, Poirot examined the windows once more, his fingers probing the heavy iron latches. He paused at the central window, where a faint scratch marked the frame, almost invisible against the weathered wood. "Voilà," he murmured. A scratch not from force, but from precision. The window was open, but not in the usual way. Hastings frowned. Opened? But the latch was secure and the key was inside the room. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The key, Hastings, is the illusion. The latch was secure when we arrived, but was it so at the moment of the murder? I think not. The killer entered, fired the shot, and left, locking the door to create the puzzle. Japp's brows rose. You're saying the locked room was a trick? But the gun, where is it? Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The gun, Japp, is hidden but not far. The garden, the window, the petal, these point to a method most cunning. Let us summon the household and confront them with this new evidence. The drawing room was a cauldron of tension as the suspects gathered, their faces etched with fear and defiance. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her silver hair framing a face pale with strain. Evelyn Carter, her eyes red from crying, sat alone, avoiding Dr. Lawrence Redfern, who stood stiffly, his spectacles glinting. Charles Wentworth's florid face was set in a scowl, his pacing halted by Poirot's presence. Mrs. Clara Wentworth's pearls clicked nervously, and Miss Beatrice Lyle's notebook lay open, her pen poised but still. Poirot held up the rose petal, its wilted edges stark against his gloved fingers. Mesdames et messieurs, the garden has spoken. A petal, fresh and plucked, was found outside the study last night, and a mark in the soil beneath the window betrays a movement on the night of Sir Reginald's death. Someone used the garden to approach the study, to enter or leave. Who was it? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Margaret's voice trembled. The garden? I don't understand. No one could climb to those windows. They're too high. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Not climb, madame, but approach. The window was opened, the shot fired, the room locked. All to create the illusion of impossibility, but the roses betray the truth. Evelyn's voice was sharp, her eyes flashing. You're accusing us again, Monsieur Poirot? I was in my room, as I've said. I know nothing about the garden. Redfern adjusted his spectacles, his voice steady but strained. Nor I. My cigarette case in the library was a mistake, nothing more. I wasn't in the garden. Wentworth slammed his fist on a table, rattling the china. This is madness. I was with Clara, as she's told you. I didn't go near the blasted garden. Mrs. Wentworth nodded, her voice cold. Charles was with me. We heard nothing, saw nothing. Miss Lyle spoke softly, her eyes fixed on her notebook. I was in my room after 9. I don't know anything about the garden or the roses. Poirot paced, his cane tapping softly. Bien. And yet the petal was fresh, the mark recent. Someone was in the garden, and they were not alone. Let us consider the letter. Burned, but speaking of debt and regret, who had cause to regret? Who owed a debt to Sir Reginald? The room fell silent, the accusation hanging like a blade. Then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Wentworth stood, her pearls slipping from her fingers to the floor. Enough, she cried, her voice breaking. I can't bear this any longer. The letter, it was mine. I wrote to Reginald begging him to forgive Charles's debt. He was going to ruin us, to take everything. Wentworth's face drained of color. Clara, what are you saying? Mrs. Wentworth's eyes filled with tears. I wrote to him, Charles, pleading for mercy. He refused. But I didn't kill him, I swear it. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. Précisément. The letter is revealed, and with it a motive. But the murder, madam, did you burn the letter to hide your plea or to protect another? Mrs. Wentworth sank back into her chair, sobbing. I burned it after I heard he was dead. I was afraid it would look like a motive. The room erupted in murmurs, the suspects exchanging shocked glances. Lady Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Evelyn's eyes widened, Redfern's spectacles slipped, and Miss Lyle's pen scratched furiously. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "The trap has caught its prey, mes amis. The letter, the petal, the window. They point to the truth. Tomorrow we will gather again, and Hercule Poirot will reveal the killer." As the group dispersed, their footsteps heavy with dread, Hastings followed Poirot to the garden, where the roses stood in silent judgment. "The letter, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Mrs. Wentworth's confession. It changes everything." Poirot's smile was serene. "It changes much, Hastings, but not everything. The killer is clever, but they have left too many traces. The garden, the window, the petal, these are the path to the truth." As night fell over Hunter's Lodge, the mist thickened, cloaking the estate in mystery. The trap had been sprung and the killer was cornered. Hastings felt the thrill of the chase, knowing that Poirot was ready to unveil the final act. The garden's secret was out and the truth was within reach. Chapter 11. The Final Gathering. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Hunter's Lodge, casting a pale, uncertain light across the drawing room where the household assembled for what Hercule Poirot had promised would be the final revelation. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension palpable as Captain Hastings took his place near the window, his heart pounding with the certainty that the mystery of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder was about to be unveiled. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure radiating an unshakable confidence, his green eyes sweeping the room with a quiet intensity that silenced even the faintest murmur. "Mon ami," Poirot whispered to Hastings, his voice low but vibrant with purpose. "Today the curtain rises on the final act. The killer has hidden well, but the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot have seen through the illusion. Observe, and you will see the truth revealed." Inspector Japp, stationed by the door with his notebook at the ready, nodded grimly. "I hope you're right, Poirot. That letter from Mrs. Wentworth and the rose petal have stirred things up, but we're still missing the how and the who. Let's have it then." Poirot turned to the assembled group, his cane tapping softly as he paced. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her silver hair framing a face pale with dread, her hands clutching a handkerchief. Evelyn Carter sat alone, her auburn hair pulled back, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Dr. Lawrence Redfern stood apart, his spectacles glinting nervously as he avoided her gaze. Charles Wentworth's florid face was set in a scowl, his fists clenched at his sides, while Mrs. Clara Wentworth's pearls lay still, her expression one of quiet resignation. Miss Beatrice Lyle, her notebook open but untouched, watched Poirot with an intensity that bordered on fear. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding, "the death of Sir Reginald Harrington has been a puzzle most intricate. A locked room, a silent shot, a burned letter, a misplaced key, a rose petal. But the pieces are now in place, and the truth is clear. Today, Hercule Poirot will reveal the murderer." A gasp rippled through the room, followed by a heavy silence. Lady Margaret's hand trembled. Evelyn's eyes widened. Redfern's spectacles slipped. Wentworth's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Wentworth's gaze dropped to the floor. Miss Lyle's pen hovered, then stilled. Poirot held up the burned letter fragment, its charred edges stark against his gloved fingers. "Let us begin with the letter, written by Mrs. Wentworth, pleading for mercy over a debt owed by her husband. It was burned to hide a motive, yet it survived to point to the truth. But the letter is only one thread in our tapestry. He turned to the rose petal, held delicately in his handkerchief. This petal, found outside the study, tells us of a presence in the garden. A presence that moved unseen on the night of the murder. The roses, neglected yet visited, are witnesses to the killer's path. Poirot paced, his eyes never leaving the group. The locked room, the silent shot. These are not mysteries, but illusions. The study's window was opened, not by force, but by cunning. The key on the desk was placed to deceive. The shot was silent because it was not what it seemed. Let us reconstruct the crime. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Sir Reginald was in his study, troubled by a letter. At 10 he met with Mr. Wentworth, who left by 9:30, as confirmed by Mrs. Wentworth. At 11, Dr. Redfern was in the library, leaving his cigarette case, a careless act or perhaps deliberate. But the murder occurred between midnight and 2 in a locked room with no gun found. Lady Margaret's voice was faint. But how, Monsieur Poirot? The door was locked, the windows secure, no one could have entered. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Non, madame. The window was opened and the killer entered through the garden. The mark in the soil, the rose petal, these betray the path. The window was relatched from within, using a simple device, a string perhaps pulled through a crack to secure the latch. The key was moved to the desk to create the illusion of a locked room. Japp's brows rose. A string? That's clever, Poirot, but what about the gun and the shot no one heard? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The shot was silent because it was not fired in the study. Sir Reginald was killed elsewhere in the garden, perhaps, and his body was placed in the study to stage the scene. The gun was removed, hidden where we have not yet looked. A murmur of shock passed through the room. Evelyn's voice trembled. The garden? But who would do such a thing? And why? Poirot turned to Miss Beatrice Lyle, who had been silent, her notebook forgotten. Mademoiselle Lyle, you were Sir Reginald's secretary, privy to his secrets. You saw the letter on his desk at 9. You said he was troubled. What did you know? Miss Lyle's face paled, her sharp features tightening. I told you I didn't read it. He put it away when I entered. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, mademoiselle, you were in the garden that night. The rose petal, fresh and plucked, was found outside the study. You who claimed to be in your room were seen by the roses. You who typed Sir Reginald's correspondence knew of his plans to dissolve the partnership with Mr. Wentworth, a plan that threatened your future. Miss Lyle's pen fell to the floor, her hands trembling. That's absurd. I was in my room. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. Poirot's voice was soft but relentless. No reason, mademoiselle, or a reason most desperate. Sir Reginald's death ensured the partnership continued, securing your position. You wrote no letter, but you knew of Mrs. Wentworth's plea. You used the garden to approach the study, to stage the murder, to create the locked room illusion. The room erupted in gasps. Lady Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Redfern stepped forward, Wentworth roared in protest, and Mrs. Wentworth stared at Miss Lyle in disbelief. Miss Lyle stood, her voice shrill. You have no proof. This is speculation, nothing more. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Proof, mademoiselle? The rose petal is proof. The mark in the soil is proof. Your knowledge of the letter, your presence in the garden, these are proof. You shot Sir Reginald in the garden using a silencer to mask the sound. You carried his body to the study, entered through the window, and staged the scene. The key was moved, the window relatched, the gun hidden, perhaps in the garden where we will find it. Miss Lyle's composure shattered, her face crumpling as she sank back into her chair. I didn't mean to. He was going to ruin everything, my life, my work. It was all I had. The room was silent, the weight of her confession settling like a stone. Japp stepped forward, his voice firm. Beatrice Lyle, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Harrington. As Japp led her away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes calm but triumphant. The truth, mon ami, is a diamond, hidden but unmistakable. The roses, the letter, the key, they led us to her. Hastings, stunned, shook his head. But the silencer, Poirot. How did you know? Poirot's smile was serene. The silence, Hastings. A shot, unheard in a quiet house. It could only be a silencer. The garden was her stage, the locked room her illusion. But Hercule Poirot sees through all illusions. As the household dispersed, their faces a mix of shock and relief, the mist outside Hunter's Lodge began to lift, revealing the stark beauty of the Derbyshire hills. The mystery was solved, the killer unmasked, but Hastings knew the final chapter was yet to come. Poirot's reflection on the human heart, and the quiet exit of the great detective. Chapter 12. The Reflection. The morning mist had finally lifted from Hunter's Lodge, revealing the rugged beauty of the Derbyshire hills in sharp relief against a pale November sky. The grand manor, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, as if freed from the weight of the dark secret that had haunted its halls. Captain Hastings, seated in the library with a cup of tea grown cold, watched Hercule Poirot as he stood by a tall bookcase, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet satisfaction. The unmasking of Miss Beatrice Lyle as Sir Reginald Harrington's murderer had brought the investigation to a dramatic close, yet Hastings knew that Poirot's work was not yet complete. There remained the reflection, the moment when the great detective would distill the lessons of the case. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to Hastings with a faint smile. The puzzle is solved, the killer revealed. But the heart of the matter, the why, requires contemplation. The human soul, it is complex, yes? And it is in understanding this complexity that we find true resolution. Inspector Japp, slumped in an armchair with his notebook closed, nodded wearily. You've done it again, Poirot. I'll admit I was betting on Wentworth. But you saw through the lot of them. That business with the rose petal and the silencer, brilliant if I do say so. Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. Merci, Japp. But it was not brilliance, merely method. The clues, the letter, the key, the petal, the silent shot, were all there, waiting to be read. The mind of Hercule Poirot simply arranged them in order. Hastings leaned forward, still marveling at the revelation. But Poirot, how did you know it was Miss Lyle? She seemed so unobtrusive, so unlikely to commit such a crime. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Mon ami, the unobtrusive are often the most dangerous, for they are overlooked. Miss Lyle was the shadow in the background, the one who saw all, knew all. Her position as Sir Reginald's secretary gave her access to his secrets, his plans to dissolve the partnership with Mr. Wentworth, which threatened her livelihood. She was not merely a typist, Hastings, but a woman of ambition, trapped in a role that offered no future. He paused, his eyes gleaming with the clarity of hindsight. The letter from Mrs. Wentworth pleading for mercy over her husband's debt was the spark. Miss Lyle saw it, knew its contents, and used it to her advantage. She burned it to cast suspicion on the Wentworths, but the fragments survived to betray her. The rose petal, the mark in the garden soil, these pointed to her movements, her presence outside the study. The silent shot achieved with a silencer was her masterstroke, and the locked room was her illusion, created with a string to relatch the window and a key moved to the desk. Jap rubbed his chin. It's clever, I'll give her that, but why go to all that trouble? Why not just shoot him and be done with it? Poirot's smile was patient. Because, Jap, Miss Lyle is a planner, a mind of precision. She wished to create a puzzle that would baffle us. A locked room, a missing gun, a silent shot. She underestimated only one thing: the little gray cells of Hercule Poirot. Hastings shook his head, still grappling with the complexity. And the roses, Poirot? You kept mentioning them. How did they fit? Poirot plucked a wilted petal from a vase on the table, holding it to the light. The roses, Hastings, were her undoing. They were neglected, yet the gardener was present, as the estate records showed. Miss Lyle, in her haste to move through the garden, plucked a petal, perhaps unconsciously, and left it as a clue. It was fresh, plucked on the night of the murder and again last night when she returned to ensure her secret was safe. The roses, mon ami, were her silent accusers. The library door opened, and Lady Margaret entered, her silver hair neatly arranged but her face etched with grief. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I must thank you. The truth is painful, but it is better than the shadow of suspicion over us all. Beatrice. I never imagined she could do such a thing. Poirot bowed slightly, his expression compassionate. Madame, the human heart is capable of great deception, even in those who seem most loyal. Miss Lyle acted out of fear and desperation, but her actions betrayed her. Lady Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening. Reginald was a hard man, but he did not deserve this. I only wish I had seen her for what she was. Poirot's voice was gentle. Do not blame yourself, madam. The truth was hidden, but it has been found. As Lady Margaret left, Evelyn Carter appeared, her auburn hair loose, her face pale but resolute. Monsieur Poirot, I owe you an apology. I was so angry, so afraid, but you were right to press us. Lawrence and I, we've been strained, but we'll mend. Poirot's eyes softened. Mademoiselle, the truth, though painful, brings clarity. You and Dr. Redfern will find your way, for love, like truth, endures. Evelyn managed a small smile before retreating, leaving Poirot, Hastings, and Jap alone once more. Jap stood, stretching his arms. Well, that's that then. I'll have Miss Lyle taken to the station and we'll search the garden for that gun. You've outdone yourself, Poirot. Poirot's smile was modest. It is not I, Jap, but the method. The clues speak and I listen, that is all. As Jap left to organize the search, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low. What now, Poirot? The case is solved, but I can't help feeling there's more to it. Something about Miss Lyle's motive that doesn't quite fit. Poirot's eyes gleamed with approval. Bien pensé, Hastings. Her motive was desperation, yes, but also pride. She saw herself as indispensable, yet Sir Reginald's plans threatened to cast her aside. The human heart, mon ami, is a labyrinth of desires and fears. Miss Lyle's crime was not just for survival, but for control. The library grew quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock. Poirot stood by the window looking out at the rose garden where the wilted blooms seemed to nod in agreement. "The case is closed, Hastings," he said softly, "but the lesson remains. We must always look beyond the surface, for it is in the shadows that the truth hides." As they prepared to leave Hunter's Lodge, Hastings felt a mix of relief and melancholy. The mystery had been solved, the killer unmasked. But the cost was evident in the strained faces of the household. Poirot, however, was serene, his work complete. The roses, the letter, the key, all had led to the truth, and the great detective was ready to depart, leaving the manor to heal in his wake. The mist had cleared, and the hills glowed with a quiet beauty. Hastings followed Poirot to the waiting car, knowing that the Belgian detective's mind was already turning to the next puzzle, the next truth waiting to be uncovered. For Hercule Poirot, the world was a stage, and he was its master director, revealing the secrets of the human heart with unerring precision. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Truth. The afternoon light bathed Hunter's Lodge in a soft golden glow, as if the Derbyshire hills themselves sought to soothe the wounds left by the revelation of Miss Beatrice Lyle's guilt. The grand manor, though still imposing with its ivy-clad walls and ancient timbers, seemed to breathe more freely, its oppressive air lightened by the resolution of Sir Reginald Harrington's murder. Captain Hastings, standing on the gravel drive with his suitcase packed, watched Hercule Poirot adjust his hat with meticulous care, the detective's small figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm of emotions that had swept through the household. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice carrying the familiar lilt of satisfaction. "The case is closed, the truth revealed, but the echoes of that truth linger. We must take a moment to consider what we have learned. For the human heart, it speaks long after the crime is solved." Inspector Japp, his coat slung over one arm, joined them, his face etched with the fatigue of a case hard won. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, shaking his head. "I was sure it was Wentworth, or maybe Redfern, but you saw straight through to that Lyle woman. The garden, the silencer. How did you piece it all together so neatly?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a modest smile. "It is not neatness, Japp, but order. The clues, the burned letter, the rose petal, the misplaced key, the silent shot were like notes in a symphony. One must only listen to hear the melody. Miss Lyle, she played her part well, but she could not outwit the little gray cells." Hastings, still grappling with the intricacies of the case, gestured toward the rose garden, where the wilted bloom stood as a silent testament to the crime. "I still can't believe it was Miss Lyle, Poirot. She seemed so insignificant, so quiet. What drove her to such a desperate act?" Poirot turned, his eyes gleaming with the clarity of insight. "Desperation, Hastings, and pride. Miss Lyle was no mere secretary. She was the keeper of Sir Reginald's secrets, the silent force behind his empire. When he planned to dissolve the partnership with Mr. Wentworth, he threatened her world. To her, it was not just a job, but her identity. The letter from Mrs. Wentworth pleading for mercy gave her the opportunity to act, to cast suspicion elsewhere while she staged her perfect crime." He paused, his gaze drifting to the garden. "The roses, mon ami, were her mistake. She moved through the garden to reach the study window, plucking a petal in her haste. That petal, fresh and damning, led us to her. The silencer muffled the shot, fired in the garden, and the body was carried to the study to create the locked room illusion. A string through the window frame relatched it, and the key was moved to the desk. A clever deception, but not clever enough. Jap nodded, his expression one of grudging admiration. And we found the gun this morning hidden in a hollowed-out rosebush, just as you predicted. A38 with a silencer wiped clean of prints. She thought she'd covered every angle. Poirot's smile was serene. She did, Jap. But no one can cover the truth from Hercule Poirot. The human heart, it betrays itself in the smallest details. The library door opened and Lady Margaret emerged, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she approached. Her face, though still pale, carried a quiet strength. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "I cannot thank you enough. The truth is a bitter pill, but it has freed us from the shadow of suspicion. Beatrice, I trusted her and she betrayed us all." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression compassionate. "Madam, betrayal is a wound, but truth is the salve. You will heal, and Hunter's Lodge will know peace again." Lady Margaret managed a faint smile. "I hope so. Reginald was not a perfect man, but he deserved better than this. I only wish I had seen her for what she was." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Do not blame yourself, madame. The heart is a labyrinth, and even the most loyal can hide darkness within." As Lady Margaret returned to the house, Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern appeared, their hands clasped once more, a tentative reconciliation evident in their closeness. Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Monsieur Poirot, I was so afraid Lawrence was involved, but you've shown us the truth. We can move forward now." Redfern adjusted his spectacles, his voice soft. "I owe you an apology, Monsieur Poirot. I should have admitted I was in the library. My silence only complicated things." Poirot's eyes softened. "Monsieur, your silence was born of fear, not guilt. You and Mademoiselle Carter, your love will endure, for it is built on truth." The couple nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of gratitude and relief before retreating to the house. Charles Wentworth and his wife followed, his florid face subdued, her pearls clutched tightly. "Poirot," Wentworth said gruffly, "I'm not one for sentiment, but you've saved us from ruin. Clara's letter, it could have destroyed us." Mrs. Wentworth's voice was low. "I burned it to protect Charles, not to hide a crime. Thank you for seeing the difference." Poirot bowed again. "Madame, Monsieur, the truth distinguishes the innocent from the guilty. Your debt to Sir Reginald was a motive, but not the motive. Go in peace." As the Wentworths departed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind still turning over the case. "It's remarkable, Poirot. You saw through the locked room, the silencer, the petal, everything. But what made you suspect Miss Lyle so early?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Her silence, Hastings. She was too quiet, too perfect in her alibis. The unobtrusive are often the most dangerous, for they observe all while revealing nothing. Her knowledge of the letter, her access to the study, her presence in the garden, these were the threads that led to her." The car that would take them back to London waited on the drive, its engine humming softly. Jap shook Poirot's hand, his grin broad. "You're a wonder, Poirot. I'll see to the paperwork on Lyle. Safe travels, and don't go finding any more murders before I've had a rest." Poirot chuckled. "I make no promises, Jap. The world is full of puzzles, and Hercule Poirot is never idle." As they climbed into the car, Hastings looked back at Hunter's Lodge, its grandeur now softened by the light of truth. "It's a strange thing, Poirot," he said, "how such a beautiful place could hide such darkness." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his hat. Beauty, Hastings, is but a mask. It is the work of the detective to look beneath, to find the truth in the shadows. And that, mon ami, is what we have done. The car rolled down the winding lane, leaving Hunter's lodge behind. The roses in the garden, though wilted, seemed to stand a little taller, as if relieved of their burden. The echoes of truth lingered, and Hastings knew that Poirot's words would stay with him long after the case was forgotten. The great detective, with his unerring logic and keen insight, had once again brought light to the darkness, and the world was a little more orderly for it. Chapter 14. The Quiet Departure. The Derbyshire hills stretched endlessly before Hunter's lodge, their gentle slopes bathed in the soft light of a late November afternoon. The grand manor, with its ivy-clad walls and ancient timbers, stood as a silent sentinel, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot. Captain Hastings, standing by the hired motor car that would carry them back to London, felt a strange mix of relief and melancholy. The murder of Sir Reginald Harrington had been solved, the killer unmasked, yet the echoes of the case lingered like the faint scent of roses carried on the breeze. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored overcoat and polished shoes, adjusted his hat with a precise flick of his wrist, his green eyes scanning the estate one final time. "Mon ami," he said, turning to Hastings with a faint smile, "the curtain has fallen on our little drama and the stage is clear. Yet, as always, the heart of the matter leaves its mark, does it not?" Hastings nodded, his gaze drifting to the rose garden where the wilted blooms stood as a quiet reminder of Miss Beatrice Lyle's treachery. "It's hard to believe it's over, Poirot. The way you pieced it together, the petal, the silencer, the window, it was like watching a puzzle come together piece by piece." Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. "Précisément, Hastings. A puzzle is only a matter of order and method. The clues were there, the burned letter, the misplaced key, the rose petal, the silent shot. It was merely a question of arranging them correctly with the little gray cells." Inspector Japp emerged from the lodge, his coat slung over his shoulder, a weary grin on his face. "All sorted, Poirot," he said, shaking the detective's hand. "Lyle's on her way to the station, and we've got the gun. Found right where you said, in that hollowed-out rose bush. I'll never know how you do it, but I'm glad you're on our side." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression modest. "Merci, Japp. It is not I, but the truth that triumphs. The killer," she thought herself clever, but no one can hide from the logic of Hercule Poirot. Japp chuckled, clapping Hastings on the shoulder. "Safe travels, you two. And try to stay out of trouble for a bit. I could use a quiet week." Hastings grinned. "No promises, Japp." Trouble seems to find Poirot wherever he goes. As Japp returned to the lodge to finalize his reports, Lady Margaret appeared on the steps, her silver hair gleaming in the fading light. Her face, though still marked by grief, carried a quiet resolve. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady, "I cannot express my gratitude. You've lifted a shadow from this house, though the cost was great." Poirot's eyes softened as he bowed. "Madame, the truth is a bitter medicine, but it heals. Hunter's Lodge will find its peace, and you will find your strength." Lady Margaret's lips trembled, but she managed a nod. "Reginald was not an easy man, but he was my husband. To know the truth, however painful, is a comfort. I wish you a safe journey." As she turned back to the house, Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern approached, their hands clasped tightly, a sign of their mended bond. Evelyn's auburn hair caught the light and her eyes were bright with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, we owe you so much. I was so afraid, but you've given us a chance to start anew." Redfern adjusted his spectacles, his voice earnest. "I should have been honest about the library, Monsieur Poirot. My silence only made things worse. Thank you for seeing the truth." Poirot's smile was warm. "Mademoiselle, Monsieur, the heart seeks truth even when it falters. Your love will guide you as the truth has guided me." The couple retreated, their steps lighter, and Charles Wentworth and his wife appeared next. Wentworth's florid face was subdued, his usual bluster tempered by the ordeal. "Poirot," he said gruffly, "I'm not one for fancy words, but you've saved us from a mess. That letter Clara wrote, it could have ruined us." Mrs. Wentworth's pearls gleamed as she nodded. "I acted foolishly burning it, but you understood. Thank you." Poirot bowed once more. "Monsieur, Madame, the truth distinguishes the innocent. Your debt to Sir Reginald was a shadow, but it is lifted now." As the Wentworths returned to the lodge, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind still turning over the case. "It's extraordinary, Poirot. Miss Lyle seemed so ordinary. How did you know she was capable of such a crime?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his gloves. "The ordinary, Hastings, are often the most extraordinary in their secrets. Miss Lyle was a woman of precision, of ambition hidden beneath a quiet exterior. Her role as secretary gave her power, but also vulnerability. When Sir Reginald threatened to dissolve the partnership, he threatened her world. She acted not just for survival, but for control, a motive as old as time." He paused, his gaze drifting to the rose garden. "The roses, mon ami, were her silent accusers. She moved through the garden to stage her crime, leaving a petal as her mistake. The silencer, the window, the key, all were part of her illusion. But the truth cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot." Hastings shook his head, marveling at his friend's insight. "And the silencer, how did you deduce that?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The silence, Hastings. A gunshot in a quiet house, unheard by all. It could only be a silencer. The garden was her stage, the locked room her deception. But the little gray cells, they see all." The car engine hummed, ready to carry them back to London. Hastings took one last look at Hunter's Lodge, its grandeur softened by the light of resolution. "It's a strange thing, Poirot," he said, "how a place so beautiful could hide such darkness." Poirot nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Beauty, Hastings, is but a veil. The detective's task is to lift it, to reveal the truth beneath, and that, mon ami, is what we have done." As the car rolled down the winding lane, the roses in the garden seemed to nod in farewell, their wilted petals a reminder of the truth they had helped uncover. Hastings settled back, his mind at ease, knowing that Poirot's genius had once again brought order to chaos. The great detective sat beside him, his expression serene, already turning to the next puzzle that awaited. Hunter's Lodge faded into the distance, its secrets laid bare, and the world moved on, guided by the unerring logic of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 15. The Curtain Falls. The sun dipped low over the Derbyshire hills, casting a final golden glow across Hunter's Lodge as the hired motor car idled on the gravel drive, ready to carry Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings back to the bustle of London. The grand manor with its ivy-clad walls and ancient timbers stood serene, as if cleansed by the revelation of Miss Beatrice Lyle's guilt in the murder of Sir Reginald Harrington. The oppressive weight that had hung over the estate had lifted, replaced by a quiet melancholy, a recognition of the cost of truth. Hastings, his suitcase at his feet, watched Poirot adjust his gloves with meticulous care, the detective's small figure a beacon of order in a world made chaotic by human passions. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but resonant as he glanced at the lodge one last time. "The drama is complete, the truth unveiled. Yet, as always, the heart lingers on the lessons learned, for the mystery of the human soul is never fully solved." Hastings nodded, his gaze drifting to the rose garden where the wilted blooms stood as silent witnesses to the crime. "It's hard to believe it's over, Poirot. The way you unraveled it, the petal, the silencer, the window, it was like watching a master painter finish a canvas." Poirot's mustache twitched with a modest smile. "Merci, Hastings, but it is not artistry, but method. The clues, the burned letter, the misplaced key, the rose petal, the silent shot, were the notes of a symphony, disordered until arranged by the little gray cells. Miss Lyle, she played her part with cunning, but she could not outwit the logic of Hercule Poirot." Inspector Japp emerged from the lodge, his coat slung over his arm, a satisfied grin on his face. "All wrapped up, Poirot," he said, shaking the detective's hand. "Lyle's in custody, the gun's secured, and the paperwork's done. I'll admit I had my money on Wentworth, but you saw through the lot of them. That rose petal business, pure genius." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression serene. "Not genius, Jap, but observation. The petal was her mistake, the silencer her method, the window her stage. The truth was always there, waiting to be seen." Jap clapped Hastings on the shoulder. "Keep an eye on him, Hastings. He'll have us chasing another murderer before the week's out." Hastings chuckled, though he knew it was likely true. "I'll try, Jap, but you know Poirot. Trouble finds him." As Japp returned to the lodge to finalize his duties, Lady Margaret appeared on the steps, her silver hair catching the fading light. Her face, though still marked by grief, carried a quiet dignity. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady, "you have given us closure, though it came at a price. I never suspected Beatrice. She was like a shadow, always there, always silent." Poirot's eyes softened as he bowed. "Madame, the silent ones are often the most dangerous, for they see all while revealing nothing. Miss Lyle's betrayal was born of desperation and pride, but the truth has set you free." Lady Margaret nodded, her lips trembling. "Reginald was a difficult man, but he was my husband. Knowing the truth, however painful, allows us to move forward. Safe travels, and thank you." As she retreated, Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern approached, their hands clasped tightly, their faces reflecting a renewed bond. Evelyn's auburn hair glowed in the sunlight, and her voice was warm with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, you've given us a second chance. I was so afraid, but you saw the truth when we couldn't." Redfern adjusted his spectacles, his tone earnest. "I should have admitted my time in the library sooner. My silence only complicated things. Thank you for your clarity." Poirot's smile was warm. "Mademoiselle, monsieur, the heart seeks truth, even in its fear. Your love will endure, for it is rooted in honesty." The couple smiled, retreating with a lightness in their steps. Charles Wentworth and his wife followed, his florid face softened by relief, her pearls gleaming as she held them gently. "Poirot," Wentworth said gruffly, "you've saved us from a nightmare. That letter Clara wrote, it could have been our ruin." Mrs. Wentworth's voice was soft but firm. "I acted foolishly burning it, but you understood my intent. We're in your debt." Poirot bowed once more. "Monsieur, madame, the truth distinguishes the innocent from the guilty. Your debt to Sir Reginald was a shadow, but it is lifted now. Go in peace." As the Wentworths returned to the lodge, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind still turning over the intricacies of the case. "It's remarkable, Poirot. Miss Lyle seemed so invisible. What made you focus on her?" Poirot's eyes gleamed as he adjusted his hat. "Her invisibility, Hastings, was her strength and her weakness. As Sir Reginald's secretary, she knew his secrets, his plan to dissolve the partnership, his financial pressures. She saw the letter from Mrs. Wentworth and used it to cast suspicion, burning it to hide her own motive. The rose petal left in her haste was her error, and the garden revealed her path. The silencer, the window, the key, all were part of her illusion. But the truth cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." Hastings shook his head, marveling at his friend's insight. "And the silencer, how did you know it was used in the garden?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The silence, Hastings. A gunshot unheard in a quiet house. It could only be a silencer. The mark in the soil, the petal, these told me the murder occurred outside. The body moved to the study to create the locked room puzzle. A string through the window frame relatched it, and the key was placed on the desk to deceive. Simple, yet clever." The car engine hummed, ready to depart. Hastings took one last look at Hunter's Lodge, its grandeur softened by the light of truth. "It's a strange thing, Poirot," he said. "How such a place could hold such darkness, yet now it feels at peace." Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Darkness, Hastings, is but a shadow cast by the light. The detective's task is to shine that light, to reveal the truth beneath. And that, mon ami, is what we have done." As the car rolled down the winding lane, the rose garden faded into the distance, its wilted blooms a testament to the truth they had helped uncover. Hastings settled back, his heart lighter, knowing that Poirot's genius had brought order to chaos once more. The great detective sat beside him, his expression serene, his mind already turning to the next challenge. Hunter's Lodge receded, its secrets laid bare, and the world moved on, guided by the unerring logic of Hercule Poirot. The curtain had fallen, the mystery solved, and the echoes of truth would linger in the hills. A reminder that no secret could withstand the scrutiny of the little gray cells. In the shadowed halls of Hunter's Lodge, a single gunshot echoes through the night, unheard. Sir Reginald Harrington lies dead, locked in his study, the key on his desk, the windows sealed, and the murder weapon vanished. Who could have committed this impossible crime? Was it the grieving widow, hiding secrets behind her silver hair? The defiant niece with an inheritance at stake? The volatile business partner or his tightly wound wife? Or perhaps the quiet secretary whose sharp eyes saw too much? As Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps into this web of lies, every clue, a burned letter, a wilted rose petal, a silent shot, pulls you deeper into a puzzle where no one is what they seem. Will you unravel the truth before Poirot reveals the killer in a shocking, logical twist? Chapter 1. The Arrival at Hunter's Lodge. The late autumn sun cast a golden pallor over the rolling Derbyshire hills. where Hunter's Lodge stood like a sentinel of a bygone era. Nestled in a secluded valley, the grand Elizabethan manor, with its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows, seemed to whisper secrets of centuries past. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth, and the distant bleating of sheep only deepened the illusion of pastoral serenity. Yet as Captain Arthur Hastings drove his hired motor car along the winding lane toward the estate, an inexplicable unease settled in his chest. It was not the chill of the November afternoon, but something less tangible. A premonition, perhaps, of the darkness that awaited. Hastings had been summoned to Hunter's Lodge by an urgent telegram from his old friend Hercule Poirot. The message, characteristically brief yet commanding, read, "Come at once. Tragedy at Hunter's Lodge. Discretion paramount. Poirot." Hastings, ever loyal to his friend's enigmatic summons, had left London post-haste, though not without a twinge of irritation at the lack of detail. Poirot, with his penchant for the dramatic, rarely divulged more than necessary until the moment suited his meticulous sense of timing. As the car crested the final hill, the lodge came into full view, its chimneys silhouetted against the fading light. The estate belonged to Sir Reginald Harrington, a retired industrialist whose wealth, amassed in the steel trade, had secured this retreat for his twilight years. Hastings had heard of Sir Reginald, a man of brusque manners and sharp business acumen, but knew little of his private life. The telegram suggested a matter of grave importance, and Hastings braced himself for the sort of intricate puzzle that so delighted Poirot's little gray cells. At the lodge's imposing oak door, Hastings was greeted by a butler, Mr. Grayson, whose gaunt frame and hollow eyes betrayed a sleepless night. "Captain Hastings, sir?" the butler inquired, his voice low and strained. "Monsieur Poirot is expecting you in the drawing-room. If you'll follow me." The interior of Hunter's Lodge was as grand as its exterior promised, with polished oak paneling, Persian rugs, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the halls. Yet the atmosphere was oppressive, as though the very walls held their breath. Grayson led Hastings to a spacious drawing-room where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled company. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure a study in contrast to the room's heavy opulence. His patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was waxed to perfection, and his sharp green eyes surveyed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. Beside him stood Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, his broad shoulders slumped with fatigue, and a small knot of individuals whom Hastings presumed to be the household and guests of Hunter's Lodge. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," Poirot exclaimed, his voice warm but tinged with urgency. "You arrive at the precise moment. Allow me to present the situation, for it is, I fear, most grave." Inspector Japp, ever practical, interjected before Poirot could elaborate. "It's murder, Hastings. Sir Reginald Harrington was found dead in his study this morning, shot through the heart. No weapon in sight, no signs of a struggle, and the room locked from the inside. It's a proper puzzle, and I'm glad Poirot's here to make sense of it." Hastings' eyes widened. "Locked from the inside, but how?" "Patience, mon ami," Poirot said, raising a manicured hand. "All will be revealed in time. For now, permit me to introduce the dramatis personae of this tragedy." He gestured toward the assembled group, who sat or stood in various states of unease. First was Lady Margaret Harrington, Sir Reginald's widow, a woman of striking beauty despite her years, her pale face framed by silver hair. Her hands twisted a lace handkerchief and her eyes darted nervously, avoiding contact with the others. Beside her sat Miss Evelyn Carter, Sir Reginald's niece, a young woman of perhaps 25 with auburn hair and a defiant tilt to her chin. Her fiancé, Dr. Lawrence Redfern, a lean man with wire-rimmed spectacles, stood protectively at her side, his expression guarded. Across the room, Mr. Charles Wentworth, Sir Reginald's business partner, paced before a bookcase. His florid complexion and restless energy suggested a man accustomed to command yet now unsettled. Nearby, Mrs. Clara Wentworth, his wife, sat rigidly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, there was Miss Beatrice Lyle, Sir Reginald's private secretary, a quiet woman with sharp features and an air of efficiency, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Poirot's gaze lingered on each in turn as though cataloging their every gesture. "This morning at precisely 8 o'clock, he began, Sir Reginald was discovered in his study by Mr. Grayson, the butler. The door was locked, the key inside, and the windows fastened. A single bullet had pierced his heart. The police, led by our good Inspector Japp, have determined the time of death to be between midnight and 2 o'clock last night. And yet no one in this household claims to have heard a shot." Hastings frowned. "But a gunshot in a quiet house, surely someone would have noticed." "Precisely, Hastings," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "It is one of many contradictions we must resolve. The method, the motive, the opportunity, all are obscured, yet all are present in this room." Lady Margaret's voice trembled as she spoke. "It's monstrous to suggest one of us could have done this. Reginald had enemies, yes, but they were in the world of business, not here in our home." "Enemies, madame?" Poirot's tone was gentle but probing. "Perhaps you will enlighten Poirot as to these enemies?" Lady Margaret faltered, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. I only meant his competitors. Men like Mr. Wentworth, perhaps, though I don't mean to accuse—" "Enough of that!" Charles Wentworth snapped, his face reddening further. "Reginald and I had our differences, but I'd never stoop to murder. Besides, I was in my room all night, as Clara can attest." Mrs. Wentworth nodded curtly. "My husband retired at 10 and did not leave our suite." Poirot's smile was polite but unyielding. "And you, Miss Carter?" "Dr. Redfern, where were you at the hour of this tragedy?" Evelyn Carter's eyes flashed. "I was asleep in my room, alone. As for Lawrence, he was in the guest wing. We're not married yet, Monsieur Poirot, so you needn't imply anything improper." Dr. Redfern adjusted his spectacles. "I was reading until midnight, then retired. I heard nothing unusual." Miss Lyle, the secretary, spoke softly. "I was in my room typing correspondence until 11. After that, I slept." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And so we have a house full of sleepers, yet a man is dead. Curious, is it not?" Inspector Japp cleared his throat. "We've searched the study thoroughly. No gun, no footprints, no signs of forced entry. It's as if the killer vanished into thin air." "Non, non, mon cher Japp," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "The killer has not vanished. The killer is here in this house, hidden by lies and misdirection. But fear not. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth." Hastings watched his friend, marveling at the quiet confidence that radiated from him. Poirot's eyes swept the room, noting the flicker of Lady Margaret's gaze, the clench of Wentworth's jaw, the subtle tremor in Miss Lyle's hands. Each gesture, each word was a piece of the puzzle, and Hastings knew Poirot was already assembling them in his mind. As the group dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, observe closely. The truth lies not in what is said, but in what is not said. Tomorrow we begin our inquiries in earnest. For now, let us retire and consider the order and method of this crime." The fire in the drawing room burned low, casting long shadows across the walls of Hunter's Lodge. Outside, the wind howled, as if mourning the man who lay dead within. Hastings shivered, not from the cold, but from the certainty that this was only the beginning of a dark and intricate mystery. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds that hung over Hunter's Lodge, casting a pallid light across the estate. Captain Hastings, still adjusting to the somber atmosphere of the previous evening, followed Hercule Poirot through the grand hall toward the late Sir Reginald Harrington's study. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, but an undercurrent of dread seemed to permeate the very walls. The locked room mystery of Sir Reginald's death weighed heavily on Hastings' mind, and he could sense that Poirot, with his unerring instinct for detail, was already piecing together the invisible threads of the case. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit and polished shoes, walked with a purposeful stride, his cane tapping lightly on the oak floor. "Mon ami," he said, glancing at Hastings, "today we examine the stage upon which this tragedy was enacted. The study of Sir Reginald will speak to us if we listen with care. Every object, every position, every mark, it is a language, Hastings, and Poirot is fluent." Inspector Japp awaited them at the study door, his face etched with frustration. "Morning, Poirot. Hastings. I've had my men comb this room twice over, and we're no closer to cracking it. Locked door, no gun, no way in or out. It's enough to drive a man to drink." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Patience, mon cher Japp. The impossible is merely the improbable in disguise. Let us enter." The study was a handsome room, its walls lined with leather-bound books and hunting trophies, a testament to Sir Reginald's wealth and tastes. A heavy mahogany desk dominated the center, its surface cluttered with papers, a silver inkstand, and a crystal decanter half filled with amber liquid. Behind the desk, a high-backed chair faced a large window overlooking the gardens, its curtains drawn back to reveal the gray morning. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered in the air, a grim reminder of the violence that had occurred. Sir Reginald's body had been removed, but a dark stain on the Persian rug marked the spot where he had fallen. Poirot's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a gem. He knelt beside the rug, his gloved fingers hovering over the stain. "The bullet, Japp. Where did it strike?" Japp pointed to the chair. "Right through the heart, clean shot. The bullet lodged in the backrest. We dug it out, a .38 caliber, common enough. No fingerprints, no residue, nothing to trace." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the desk. He examined the papers, business correspondence mostly with a few personal letters, and paused at a small, leather-bound notebook. "This, monsieur, is of interest," he murmured, flipping through its pages. Appointments, figures, names, and a curious entry for yesterday. Meeting with CW 10 p.m. Could this be our Mr. Charles Wentworth? Japp's brows rose. Wentworth didn't mention any meeting, said he was in bed by 10. "Précisément," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. And what is not said is often more revealing than what is said. Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, noticed a small brass key on the desk, half hidden beneath a blotter. "What's this, Poirot? Could it be significant?" Poirot picked up the key with a handkerchief, turning it in the light. The key to the study, perhaps? Yet Grayson found it in the lock, inside the room. Curious, is it not, that it should be here, separate from its purpose? He moved to the door, inspecting the lock with care. It was a sturdy mechanism showing no signs of tampering. The windows, too, were secure, their latches intact. Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. A locked room, a missing weapon, a silent gunshot. This is no ordinary crime, Hastings. It is a performance, staged with care. Japp snorted. Staged or not, someone got in here, shot Harrington, and got out without leaving a trace. I'm leaning toward Wentworth. He's got the motive. Sir Reginald was squeezing him out of their business, from what I hear. Poirot raised a hand. Motive, yes, but opportunity? Let us not rush to judgment. Come, let us speak with the household. The truth lies in their words and their silences. The interviews began in the drawing room where the suspects from the previous evening were gathered, their faces a study in tension. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her eyes red-rimmed but composed. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Redfern occupied a settee, their hands clasped tightly. Charles Wentworth stood by a window, his back to the room, while Mrs. Wentworth knitted with furious intensity. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the secretary, hovered near a writing desk, her expression unreadable. Poirot began with Lady Margaret. Madame, you said last night that Sir Reginald had enemies in business. Can you name them? Lady Margaret hesitated, her fingers twisting her handkerchief. I spoke in haste. Reginald was a hard man in business, but I know of no one who would kill him. Perhaps Mr. Wentworth could tell you more. They quarreled often. Wentworth spun around, his face flushed. That's slander, Lady Margaret. Yes, Reginald and I had disagreements, but it was business, not personal. I was in my room all night. Clara will confirm it. Mrs. Wentworth's needles paused. As I said, Charles was with me. We retired at 10 and did not leave our suite. Poirot's gaze shifted to Evelyn Carter. And you, mademoiselle? Your uncle's death. It affects your inheritance, does it not? Evelyn's cheeks flushed. If you're implying I killed him for money, you're mistaken. I loved Uncle Reginald even if he was stubborn. I was asleep when it happened. Dr. Redfern cleared his throat. As was I. I heard nothing, saw nothing. This is a terrible shock to us all. Miss Lyle, when questioned, spoke in a measured tone. I was typing letters until 11, then went to bed. Sir Reginald was alive when I left him at 9. He seemed preoccupied, but not alarmed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Preoccupied, mademoiselle, in what way? He was reading a letter, Miss Lyle said. He put it away when I entered. I didn't see its contents. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. He turned to Grayson, the butler, who stood silently by the door. And you, monsieur? You discovered the body. Tell me precisely what you saw. Grayson's voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. At 8 this morning, I brought Sir Reginald's tea. The door was locked, which was unusual. He never locked it during the day. I called out, but there was no answer. I fetched a spare key from the housekeeper and entered. He was slumped in his chair, blood on his shirt. I didn't touch anything, just called for help. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. And the key was in the lock, inside the room. Yet another key lies on the desk. Most curious, Hastings, watching the exchange, felt a familiar thrill. Poirot was in his element, sifting through the tangle of alibis and half-truths. But the locked room baffled him. How could a killer enter, shoot Sir Reginald, and leave without a trace? The answer, he knew, lay in Poirot's methodical mind. As the interviews concluded, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the clues are there, but they are veiled. The notebook, the key, the silent shot. These are the threads of our tapestry. Tonight, we will observe the household at dinner. The murderer, Hastings, is among them, and they will betray themselves if only by a glance." The day wore on, the atmosphere in Hunter's Lodge growing heavier with each passing hour. As evening approached, Hastings could not shake the feeling that the walls themselves were watching, guarding the secret of Sir Reginald's death. Poirot, however, remained serene, his confidence unshaken. "The truth, Hastings," he murmured, "is like a diamond, hidden but unmistakable when found." Chapter 3. The Belgian detective takes the stage. The dining room of Hunter's Lodge glowed under the soft light of a crystal chandelier. Its long mahogany table set with fine china and silver that gleamed despite the somber mood. The evening meal, though sumptuous, was a strained affair, with the clink of cutlery and the murmur of forced pleasantries filling the air. Captain Hastings, seated across from Hercule Poirot, could not help but feel the weight of suspicion that hung over the table like a storm cloud. Each guest, from Lady Margaret's rigid composure to Charles Wentworth's barely concealed agitation, seemed to carry a secret, and Hastings knew Poirot was watching them all with his eagle-sharp eyes. Poirot, impeccable in his black dinner jacket, sipped his wine with deliberate care, his mustache twitching slightly as he observed the company. To his right sat Lady Margaret, her silver hair catching the light as she picked at her food. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern sat side by side, their hands occasionally brushing in a gesture that spoke of quiet support. Charles and Clara Wentworth were opposite, the former's florid face betraying his irritation, while the latter's knitting needles, now absent, were replaced by a tightly clasped napkin. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the secretary, sat at the far end, her eyes fixed on her plate, though Hastings noticed her glance dart toward Poirot more than once. Inspector Japp, who had joined the dinner at Poirot's insistence, seemed out of place among the polished surroundings, his practical demeanor clashing with the formalities. "Not much of an appetite tonight, eh?" he remarked, attempting to lighten the mood. His words fell flat, met with polite nods and strained smiles. Poirot set down his glass, his voice cutting through the tension with its precise, accented clarity. "Mesdames et messieurs, it is a sad occasion that brings us together, yet the pursuit of truth must continue, even at the dinner table. I have spent the day considering the death of Sir Reginald, and I am struck by the order of this crime. It is a puzzle, yes, but one designed with care. I wonder who among you might shed light on Sir Reginald's state of mind in his final hours." The question hung in the air, and Hastings noted the subtle shifts in posture around the table. Lady Margaret's fingers tightened on her fork. Wentworth's jaw clenched. Evelyn Carter's eyes flicked to her fiancé, who adjusted his spectacles nervously. Lady Margaret spoke first, her voice steady but tinged with grief. "Reginald was himself, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps a little distracted, but he was often so when business weighed on him. He spoke of no fears, no threats." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Distracted, madame. By what, precisely? A letter, perhaps, as Miss Lyle mentioned? Miss Lyle's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. I told you I didn't see its contents. It was just a letter on his desk. He put it away when I entered. Bien sûr, Poirot said, his tone soothing yet probing. And yet such details are vital. A letter, a meeting, a locked door, these are the pieces of our puzzle. Charles Wentworth slammed his hand on the table, rattling the china. This is absurd. You're fishing, Poirot, and I won't stand for it. I told you I was in my room all night. Clara will vouch for me. Mrs. Wentworth nodded, her voice cold. As I've said, Charles was with me. We retired at 10 and did not stir. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. And yet, monsieur, your name appears in Sir Reginald's notebook for a meeting at 10 o'clock. A curious discrepancy, no? Wentworth's face reddened further. That was earlier in the evening. We discussed business, nothing more. I left his study by 9:30. Alone? Poirot asked, his voice soft but insistent. Wentworth hesitated, his eyes flickering to his wife. Yes, alone. Clara was waiting for me. Poirot turned to Evelyn Carter. Mademoiselle, your uncle's death. It changes much for you, does it not? An inheritance, perhaps? Evelyn's chin lifted defiantly. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with this, you're wrong. I didn't need Uncle Reginald's money. Lawrence and I are happy as we are. Dr. Redfern placed a hand on her arm. Evelyn speaks the truth, Monsieur Poirot. We have no motive. I was in my room reading until midnight. I heard nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on Redfern, noting the slight tremor in his hand. And you, monsieur? A doctor trained in precision. You would notice, perhaps, the details of a room, the position of a body, the absence of a weapon? Redfern's eyes narrowed. I'm a doctor, not a detective. I didn't see the body until this morning with the others. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Grayson, the butler, who stood discreetly by the sideboard. Monsieur Grayson, you have served Sir Reginald for many years, yes? Did he confide in you about any fears, any enemies? Grayson's gaunt face remained impassive. Sir Reginald was not a man to confide, sir. He was private, even with me. I noticed nothing unusual except perhaps he seemed more tired than usual these past weeks. Tired, Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. And yet he locked his study door. A new habit, perhaps. Grayson hesitated. I cannot say, sir. He did not always lock it, but he had done so before. The dinner continued, the conversation stilted and heavy with unspoken accusations. Hastings watched Poirot, marveling at his ability to unsettle the group with a single question, a single glance. The Belgian detective's method was like a scalpel, precise and unrelenting, cutting through the layers of politeness to reveal the raw nerves beneath. After dinner, Poirot drew Hastings and Japp into the library, a smaller room lined with books and lit by a single lamp. Mes amis, he said, pacing slowly, we have progressed, but not far. The alibis are too neat, too uniform. Everyone was asleep, everyone heard nothing. Yet a man is dead, and the key to his study lies not in the lock, but on the desk. Why? Japp rubbed his chin. You're thinking the key's a clue? Maybe the killer moved it to confuse us. Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. But confusion is not the goal, it is a byproduct. The killer wishes to hide the truth, but in doing so, they leave traces. The notebook, the letter, the locked door, these are not accidents, they are deliberate. Hastings frowned. But how could someone shoot Sir Reginald and leave no trace? The room was locked, the windows secure. It's impossible. Poirot's smile was almost mischievous. Impossible, Hastings. Non, non. The impossible is merely a challenge to the little gray cells. Tomorrow we will examine the grounds, the windows, the very air of this house. The truth is here, waiting to be uncovered. As they left the library, Hastings glanced back at the dining room where the guests were dispersing. Lady Margaret's silhouette lingered by the fire, her face a mask of grief. Evelyn and Redfern whispered urgently, their heads close together. Wentworth's heavy footsteps echoed as he stormed upstairs, followed by his wife's quieter tread. Miss Lyle slipped away silently, her notebook clutched to her chest. Poirot paused at the foot of the stairs, his voice low. Mon ami, observe the household. They are actors in a play, each with a role to perform. But one among them has written the script, and Poirot will find the author. The night closed in around Hunter's lodge, the wind rattling the windows like a restless spirit. Hastings lay awake, his mind racing with questions. The locked room, the missing gun, the silent shot, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Only Poirot, with his unerring logic, seemed undaunted, and Hastings took comfort in his friend's quiet confidence. The truth, as Poirot had said, was a diamond, and they were only beginning to uncover its facets. Chapter 4. The Web of Alibis. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Hunter's lodge, shrouding the manicured lawns and ancient oaks in a ghostly veil. Captain Hastings, fortified by a strong cup of tea, followed Hercule Poirot as they stepped out into the chilly air. The detective's small figure wrapped in a meticulously tailored overcoat. Poirot's eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the exterior of the lodge, lingering on the windows of Sir Reginald Harrington's study. The locked room mystery had deepened with each passing hour, and Hastings sensed that Poirot was now fully engaged, his little gray cells working at their relentless pace. Mon ami, Poirot said, his breath visible in the cold. Today we seek the truth in the physical world, the windows, the walls, the very earth beneath our feet. The study may be locked, but the world outside is not so silent. Come, let us explore. Inspector Japp joined them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. I've had my men check the grounds already, Poirot, he said, his tone weary but hopeful. No footprints, no signs of a ladder or forced entry. If someone got in or out, they're a ghost. Poirot's mustache twitched with amusement. A ghost, mon cher Japp? Non, non. The criminal is flesh and blood, and they have left their mark, however subtle. Let us begin with the windows. The trio circled the lodge to the rear, where the study's large mullioned windows overlooked a rose garden, now dormant in the November chill. The windows were high, set some 8 feet above the ground, and their heavy iron latches showed no signs of tampering. Poirot examined the stonework beneath, his gloved fingers brushing the moss-covered sill. No scratches, no marks, he murmured. Yet the absence of evidence is itself evidence, is it not? Hastings frowned. You mean the lack of footprints or ladder marks rules out an outsider? Précisément, Poirot said. The killer did not come from without. They were already within the house, or they had a method most ingenious. Japp scratched his head. But the door was locked from the inside, and the key was in the lock. Unless someone climbed through a window and locked it behind them, I don't see how it's possible. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Possible, Japp. It is not only possible, it is certain. But let us turn to the human element. The alibis, the motives, these are the keys to our mystery. Back inside, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room for further questioning. The atmosphere was taut, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her face pale but composed. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Redfern occupied their usual settee, their expressions guarded. Charles Wentworth stood by a bookcase, his arms crossed, while Mrs. Wentworth's hands fidgeted with a strand of pearls. Miss Beatrice Lyle, ever the quiet observer, sat with her notebook, her pen poised as if to record every word. Poirot began with a disarming smile. "Mesdames et messieurs, I thank you for your patience. The death of Sir Reginald is a puzzle, but one that yields to logic. Let us revisit the night of the crime. Each of you claims to have been in your rooms, asleep or occupied between midnight and 2 o'clock. Yet someone was not where they claim. Who will speak first?" Lady Margaret's voice was soft but firm. "I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I retired at 10:30 and slept until morning. I heard nothing, no shot, no footsteps." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to Evelyn Carter. "And you, mademoiselle? You were alone, you say, in your room?" Evelyn's eyes flashed with defiance. "Yes, alone. I went to bed at 11 and woke when Grayson raised the alarm. I don't see why you keep pressing me." Dr. Redfern adjusted his spectacles. "Nor I, Monsieur Poirot. I was in my room reading until midnight, then asleep. I've nothing to add." Poirot's attention turned to Charles Wentworth, whose florid face betrayed his irritation. "Monsieur Wentworth, your meeting with Sir Reginald at 10 o'clock. It was perhaps contentious?" Wentworth's jaw tightened. "We discussed business, as I said. Yes, we argued. Reginald wanted to dissolve our partnership, and I disagreed. But I left his study by 9:30, alive and well. Clara can confirm I was in our room after that." Mrs. Wentworth nodded curtly. "Charles was with me. We spoke for a time, then slept." Poirot's eyes lingered on her, noting the slight tremor in her hands. "And you, madam, heard nothing unusual? No sound from the study, which is not so far from your suite?" "Nothing," she said, her voice flat. The house was quiet. Miss Lyle, when questioned, spoke with her usual precision. "I finished typing at 11, as I told you. I heard no shot, no disturbance. Sir Reginald was alive when I left him at 9. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Bien. And yet we have a problem. A gunshot, even in a large house, is not silent. Why then did no one hear it? And the key found in the lock. Yet another on the desk. Why?" Grayson, the butler, cleared his throat. "If I may, sir, the study is at the end of the west wing, far from most bedrooms. The walls are thick and the carpets heavy. A shot might have been muffled." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Muffled, monsieur? An interesting choice of word. And the key on the desk. Did you notice it when you entered?" Grayson hesitated. I don't recall, sir." I was focused on Sir Reginald. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Of course, but let us consider another detail. The letter Miss Lyle saw on Sir Reginald's desk. Who wrote it? What did it contain?" Miss Lyle's cheeks flushed. "I told you I didn't read it. It was folded and he put it away quickly." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Bien sûr, but letters, like keys, do not vanish. We will find it and it will speak." The interviews concluded and Poirot led Hastings and Japp back to the study. There he examined the desk once more, his fingers tracing the edges of the blotter. "The letter," he murmured. "It is the key to the motive, I am certain, but where is it?" Japp sighed. We searched every inch of this room. If there was a letter, it's gone. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Gone, Jap? Or hidden? The killer is clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot. Hastings, watching his friend, felt a familiar mix of awe and frustration. Poirot's mind was a labyrinth, each turn revealing a new possibility. "What about the gun, Poirot?" he asked. "If no one heard the shot, could it have been silenced somehow?" Poirot's smile was approving. "Bien pensé, Hastings. A silencer, perhaps, or another method to mask the sound. We must consider all possibilities." As they left the study, Poirot paused by a small table in the hall, where a vase of wilted roses stood. He plucked a petal, examining it with care. "The roses, Hastings," he said softly. "They are neglected, yet the gardener was here yesterday. Why then are they dying?" Hastings frowned, puzzled by the seemingly irrelevant detail. But he knew better than to question Poirot's observations. The detective's mind was assembling the puzzle piece by piece, and every detail, however small, was a thread in the tapestry of truth. The day drew to a close, the mist thickening outside Hunter's Lodge. As the household retired, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery pressing heavier. The alibis were airtight, the clues elusive, yet Poirot's confidence remained unshaken. "The web is spun, mon ami," he said, his voice low. "But every web has a center, and there we will find our spider." Chapter 5. The Shadow of Suspicion. The heavy drapes of Hunter's Lodge did little to ward off the chill that seemed to seep from the very stones of the old manor, as though the house itself mourned Sir Reginald Harrington's death. Captain Hastings, seated in the library with a cup of tepid coffee, watched Hercule Poirot pace before a towering bookcase, his small figure radiating an intensity that belied his calm demeanor. The morning had brought no new revelations, and the locked-room mystery remained as impenetrable as ever. Yet Poirot's eyes gleamed with the quiet assurance of a man who sensed the first cracks in the facade of deception. "Mon ami," Poirot said, pausing to adjust a crooked volume on the shelf, "the truth is like a melody, hidden beneath the noise but always present if one listens with care. Today we will probe deeper, for the shadow of suspicion falls upon this household, and it is time to bring it into the light." Inspector Japp, who had joined them after a fruitless search of the servants' quarters, rubbed his eyes wearily. "I'm at my wit's end, Poirot. We've got alibis from everyone, no sign of the gun, and that blasted key on the desk makes no sense. If you've got a theory, I'm all ears." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A theory, Jap? No, not yet. But I have questions, and the answers will lead us to the truth. Let us speak with the household once more, but this time we will press where they least expect." The drawing room where the suspects were summoned was a study in contrasts, opulent yet oppressive, its grandeur marred by the tension that hung over the group. Lady Margaret sat in her usual armchair, her face a mask of dignified grief, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern occupied their settee, their hands no longer touching, as if some unspoken strain had grown between them. Charles Wentworth stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense, while Mrs. Clara Wentworth's fingers twisted her pearls with a nervous energy. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the secretary, sat with her notebook, her expression as composed as ever, though Hastings noted a faint tremor in her grip. Poirot began with a disarming politeness. Mesdames et messieurs, the tragedy of Sir Reginald's death weighs heavily upon us all. Yet I am struck by a curious detail, the silence of the night. A gunshot, even in a house as grand as this, should have roused someone. Why then was it unheard? Let us revisit your movements with precision. Lady Margaret spoke first, her voice steady. I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was asleep by 10:30. The west wing, where my room lies, is far from the study. I heard nothing. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And yet, madame, your room is above the study, is it not? The floors are thick, but a shot. It carries. Did you perhaps take a sleeping draught? Lady Margaret's cheeks flushed faintly. Yes, I took a mild sedative. It's not uncommon given my nerves since Reginald's health declined. Poirot nodded, turning to Evelyn Carter. Mademoiselle, you were alone, you say, in your room. Yet the guest wing is not so far from the study. Did you hear no sound? A creak, a footstep? Evelyn's eyes flashed with irritation. I've said it before. I was asleep. I didn't hear a thing. Why do you keep hounding me? Dr. Redfern interjected, his voice calm but firm. Evelyn is telling the truth, Monsieur Poirot. I was in my room reading until midnight. The house was silent. Poirot's gaze lingered on Redfern, noting the slight adjustment of his spectacles. And you, monsieur? A doctor, accustomed to precision. Did you note the time exactly when you retired? Redfern hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it was midnight. I checked my watch before turning off the light. Poirot turned to Charles Wentworth, whose florid face was now a shade darker. Monsieur Wentworth, your meeting with Sir Reginald at 10, it was heated, yes? And yet you claim to have left by 9:30. Did anyone see you leave the study? Wentworth's jaw tightened. No one needed to. I went straight to my room where Clara was waiting. We've told you this. Mrs. Wentworth's voice was sharp. My husband speaks the truth. He was with me by 9:45. We spoke for a time, then slept. Poirot's smile was polite but unrelenting. And you, Miss Lyle? You left Sir Reginald at 9 after typing his correspondence. Did you see Mr. Wentworth in the hall, perhaps? Miss Lyle's eyes flicked to Wentworth, then back to Poirot. No, I didn't. I went straight to my room after leaving the study. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Bien. And yet we have a discrepancy. A meeting at 10, yet all claim to be elsewhere by midnight. A gunshot unheard, a key misplaced. And the letter. Where is the letter Miss Lyle saw on Sir Reginald's desk? The room fell silent, the question hanging like a blade. Lady Margaret's fingers stilled on her handkerchief. Evelyn's gaze dropped to her lap. Wentworth's shoulders stiffened, and Redfern's spectacles glinted as he adjusted them once more. Grayson, the butler, who had been standing silently by the door, cleared his throat. If I may, sir, I found no letter when I entered the study, only the usual papers and the notebook you saw. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Précisément. Some letter is gone, yet it existed. Someone has taken it or destroyed it. Why? Japp, growing impatient, leaned forward. Look, Poirot, we've searched the study top to bottom. If there was a letter, it's not there now. Maybe it wasn't important. Poirot's smile was almost pitying. Not important, Japp? No, every detail is important. The letter, the key, the silence. These are the threads of our tapestry, and they are woven with purpose. After the interviews, Poirot led Hastings and Japp back to the study where he examined the desk once more. His fingers traced the edges of the blotter, pausing at a faint scratch mark near the inkstand. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing to the mark. "A small thing, yet significant. The desk has been disturbed not by accident, but by design." Hastings frowned. "You think someone tampered with it? To hide the letter?" Poirot nodded. "Or to plant something else? The key on the desk? The missing letter? These are not errors, but clues. The killer wishes to mislead, but they have underestimated Hercule Poirot." Japp sighed. "I still say Wentworth's our man. He had the motive. Sir Reginald was cutting him out of the business, and that meeting at 10 smells fishy." Poirot raised a hand. "Motive, yes, but opportunity? The locked room, the silent shot, these are not so easily explained. We must look beyond the obvious, Japp." As they left the study, Poirot paused by the rose garden, his eyes fixed on the wilted blooms. "The roses, Hastings," he murmured. "They are neglected, yet the gardener was here. Why?" Hastings, puzzled, shook his head. "I don't see what roses have to do with a murder." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Everything, mon ami, is connected. The roses, the letter, the key, they are part of the same story. We must only read it correctly." The afternoon wore on, the household retreating into their private grief and suspicions. Hastings watched Poirot, marveling at his ability to see meaning in the smallest details. The mystery was a labyrinth, but Poirot navigated it with unshakable confidence. As the mist thickened outside, Hastings felt a growing certainty that the truth was near, yet still maddeningly out of reach. The shadow of suspicion had fallen, and only Poirot could bring it into the light. Chapter 6. A Clue in the Ashes. The gray light of late morning filtered through the tall windows of Hunter's Lodge, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Captain Hastings, his nerves frayed by the unrelenting tension of the investigation, followed Hercule Poirot as they returned to the study where Sir Reginald Harrington had met his end. The room, though meticulously searched, seemed to hold an air of defiance, as if daring Poirot to uncover its secrets. The Belgian detective, however, moved with the serene confidence of a man who knew the truth was within his grasp, his polished shoes clicking softly on the hardwood. "Mon ami," Poirot said, pausing by the fireplace where a low fire had burned down to embers. "The study is the heart of this mystery, and it speaks to us still. We have examined the desk, the key, the windows, but we have not yet listened to the fire." Hastings frowned, puzzled by the cryptic remark. "The fire, Poirot? Surely it's just a hearth. What could it tell us?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with a familiar spark. "Everything, Hastings, has a story. The fire, it burns, it consumes, it leaves traces. Let us see what traces remain." Inspector Japp, who had joined them, looked skeptical but said nothing as Poirot knelt before the fireplace, his gloved hands carefully sifting through the ashes. The hearth was cold now, the remnants of the previous night's fire reduced to gray dust and charred fragments. Poirot's fingers paused, extracting a small blackened scrap of paper, its edges curled from the heat. He held it to the light, his expression one of quiet triumph. "Regardez, messieurs," he said, turning the fragment so they could see. "A piece of paper burned but not destroyed, and here, mon Dieu, a fragment of handwriting." Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder, squinting at the singed scrap. The ink was faded, but a few words were discernible. "Regret, debt, urgent." The rest was illegible, consumed by the flames. Japp's brows rose. A letter, you think? Could this be the one Miss Lyle saw on Sir Reginald's desk? Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. Précisément. The letter that vanished, yet here is its ghost. Someone sought to destroy it, but they were careless. The fire, it seems, is not so thorough as the killer hoped. Hastings felt a thrill of excitement. But who burned it, and why? If it was important enough to destroy, it must point to the motive. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The motive, yes, but also the method. The letter speaks of debt, of regret, perhaps a demand, perhaps a confession. We must learn who wrote it and to whom. Japp rubbed his chin. I'll have my men search the ashes again, see if we missed anything else. But this doesn't solve the locked room or the missing gun. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Japp. Each clue is a step toward the truth. The letter, the key, the silent shot. These are not separate but part of a single design. Let us now speak with the household again, for this fragment changes everything. The drawing room where the suspects were once more assembled was a cauldron of suppressed emotions. Lady Margaret sat rigidly, her eyes fixed on the fire as if it might betray her thoughts. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern sat apart, their earlier closeness replaced by a subtle distance. Charles Wentworth paced by the window, his florid face etched with irritation, while Mrs. Clara Wentworth's fingers worked nervously at her pearls. Miss Beatrice Lyle, as always, clutched her notebook, her sharp features betraying nothing. Poirot held up the burned fragment, his voice calm but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, a discovery has been made. In the ashes of the study's fire, we have found a piece of a letter, burned, but not entirely destroyed. It speaks of debt, of regret. Who among you knows of this letter? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Lady Margaret's hand trembled slightly, though her voice was steady. I know nothing of any letter, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald received many papers. Business matters, mostly. Perhaps it was one of those. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Business, madame? Or something more personal? The word regret suggests a matter of the heart, perhaps, or of conscience. Evelyn Carter's cheeks flushed. You're grasping at straws, Monsieur Poirot. If there was a letter, it could have been from anyone. A creditor, a friend. Why assume it's one of us? Dr. Redfern adjusted his spectacles, his voice measured. Evelyn is right. Sir Reginald had many dealings. A letter about debt could be from a business associate, not necessarily someone in this room. Poirot turned to Charles Wentworth, whose pacing had stopped abruptly. Monsieur Wentworth, you met with Sir Reginald at 10. Did you see a letter on his desk? Did he speak of debt? Wentworth's eyes flashed with anger. I've told you we discussed the partnership, nothing about letters or debts. I left him alive and well. Ask Clara. She knows I was with her after. Mrs. Wentworth nodded, her voice tight. Charles was in our room by 9:45. We heard nothing, saw nothing. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Lyle, who had been silent, her pen still. And you, mademoiselle? You saw a letter on Sir Reginald's desk at 9. Was it this letter, perhaps, that was later burned? Miss Lyle's lips parted, then closed. I don't know. It was folded, as I said. I didn't read it, but Sir Reginald seemed troubled by it. Troubled, Poirot repeated, his tone soft but probing. And yet you did not think to mention this trouble before? Miss Lyle's cheeks flushed. I didn't think it relevant. He was often preoccupied with business. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Bien. A letter of debt, burned in haste. A key misplaced, a shot unheard. The pieces are coming together, mes amis, but the picture is not yet clear. Tell me, who had access to the study after 9 o'clock? Grayson the butler spoke from his place by the door. No one, sir, to my knowledge. The study was locked when I brought Sir Reginald's tea at 8 the next morning. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. Locked, yet the key was on the desk. A curious detail, is it not? The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. Hastings watched their faces, noting the flicker of fear in Lady Margaret's eyes, the tightening of Wentworth's jaw, the subtle glance between Evelyn and Redfern. Miss Lyle's pen trembled slightly, though her expression remained composed. After the interviews, Poirot led Hastings and Japp to the rose garden, where the wilted blooms still stood as a silent accusation. "The letter, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "It is the heart of the motive. Debt, regret, these are not abstract. They point to a person, a relationship, a betrayal." Japp sighed. "I still say Wentworth's our man. Debt could mean he owed Sir Reginald money, and that meeting at 10 was their last argument." Poirot's smile was patient. "Perhaps, Japp, but the locked room, the burned letter, these suggest a mind more subtle than Mr. Wentworth's. We must look deeper." Hastings, puzzled, gestured to the roses. "You keep mentioning these roses, Poirot. What do they have to do with anything?" Poirot plucked another wilted petal, holding it to the light. "The roses, mon ami, are a symbol. They are neglected, yet the gardener was here. Someone has lied about their movements, and the roses know it." As the day faded into dusk, the mystery of Hunter's Lodge grew ever more intricate. The burned letter was a beacon pointing to a hidden truth, but the locked room and silent shot remained impenetrable. Hastings took solace in Poirot's unshakable confidence, knowing that the detective's mind was weaving the clues into a pattern only he could see. The shadow of suspicion grew darker, and the truth, like the roses, waited to be uncovered. Chapter 7. The cracks in the facade. The air in Hunter's Lodge seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, as if the walls themselves absorbed the mounting tension of Sir Reginald Harrington's unsolved murder. Captain Hastings, seated in the library with a neglected newspaper, watched Hercule Poirot examine a small silver cigarette case he had found on a side table. The detective's movements were precise, his eyes sharp with the intensity of a predator closing in on its quarry. The discovery of the burned letter fragment had shifted the investigation, and Hastings sensed that Poirot was now circling a truth that remained just out of reach. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning the cigarette case in his gloved hands, "the smallest objects can speak the loudest truths. This case, for instance, it is engraved with the initials L.R. Who, I wonder, is L.R.? Hastings frowned, puzzled. "Lawrence Redfern, perhaps. He's the only one with those initials." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Précisément. And yet Dr. Redfern claims to have been in his room reading until midnight. Why then is his cigarette case here in the library so close to the study?" Inspector Japp, who had entered the library with a weary sigh, perked up at the mention of the case. "That's something, Poirot. If Redfern was out of his room, he's been lying. Maybe he was near the study when the shot was fired." Poirot raised a hand, his expression cautious. "Let us not leap, Japp, but step carefully. The cigarette case is a clue, yes, but it is not yet evidence. We must test the alibis further, for the cracks in their stories are beginning to show. The household was summoned once more to the drawing room, where the familiar tableau of suspects awaited. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her silver hair catching the light, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Evelyn Carter and Dr. Lawrence Redfern sat apart, their earlier closeness replaced by a palpable strain. Charles Wentworth stood by the window, his florid face set in a scowl, while Mrs. Clara Wentworth's pearls clicked softly as she fidgeted. Miss Beatrice Lyle, as always, held her notebook, her sharp eyes darting between Poirot and the others. Poirot held up the cigarette case, its silver surface glinting in the lamplight. Mesdames et messieurs, a curious discovery. This case, marked L.R., was found in the library not far from the study where Sir Reginald met his end. Dr. Redfern, is this yours? Redfern's face paled slightly, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. Yes, it's mine. I must have left it there earlier in the day. I often sit in the library to read. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Earlier in the day, monsieur. Yet you told us you were in your room from 9 until midnight reading. Did you perhaps visit the library after your meeting with Sir Reginald? Redfern hesitated, his gaze flicking to Evelyn, who looked away. I may have stopped by briefly to fetch a book. It was before 10, I'm certain. Evelyn's voice was sharp. Lawrence, you didn't mention that. Why didn't you say so before? Redfern's jaw tightened. It slipped my mind, Evelyn. It was unimportant, a momentary visit. Poirot's smile was polite but unrelenting. Unimportant, monsieur? In a murder investigation, nothing is unimportant. The library is but a few steps from the study. Did you hear anything? A voice? A shot? Redfern shook his head. Nothing. The house was quiet. Poirot turned to Lady Margaret, whose composure seemed to falter under his gaze. Madame, you took a sedative, you say, to calm your nerves. Was this a habit, or was something particular troubling you that night? Lady Margaret's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. It was a difficult day. Reginald and I had words, not a quarrel, but a discussion. I took the sedative to sleep. Words, Poirot repeated, his tone gentle but probing. About what, madame? A letter, perhaps? A debt? Lady Margaret's eyes widened briefly, then narrowed. No, nothing like that. It was a private matter between husband and wife. Poirot nodded, his attention shifting to Charles Wentworth. Monsieur Wentworth, your meeting with Sir Reginald at 10, it was about the dissolution of your partnership, yes? Did he mention a letter or a debt? Wentworth's face reddened. I've told you it was business, nothing more. He wanted to end our partnership, and I argued against it. I left him alive, and I didn't see any blasted letter. Mrs. Wentworth's voice was cold. Charles was with me after 9:45. He didn't leave our room. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the slight tremor in her hands. And you, madam? Did you hear nothing? No footsteps? No voices? Nothing, she said, her voice firm. The house was silent. Miss Lyle, when questioned, spoke with her usual precision. I left Sir Reginald at 9, as I said. I saw no one in the hall, and I heard nothing after retiring to my room. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Bien. And yet we have a cigarette case in the library, a burned letter in the fire, a key on the desk, and a shot unheard. The cracks in your stories are small, mes amis, but they are there. Someone is lying, and Poirot will find them. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over the group. Hastings watched their faces, Lady Margaret's guarded grief, Evelyn's barely concealed anger, Redfern's nervous fidgeting, Wentworth's simmering rage, Mrs. Wentworth's icy calm, and Miss Lyle's unreadable composure. Each seemed to hide something, and Hastings knew Poirot was cataloguing every gesture, every word. After the interviews, Poirot led Hastings and Japp back to the library, where he examined the cigarette case once more. "This case, Hastings," he said, "it is a clue, but also a distraction. Dr. Redfern's presence in the library suggests he was near the study, but why leave the case behind? Was it carelessness or intent?" Japp rubbed his chin. "I'm betting on carelessness. Redfern's hiding something. Maybe he saw the killer, or maybe he's the killer himself." Poirot's smile was patient. "Perhaps, Japp, but the killer is cleverer than that. The cigarette case, the burned letter, these are threads in a web, and we must follow them carefully." Hastings, puzzled, gestured to the fireplace. "What about the letter fragment? You said it mentioned debt and regret. Could it point to Wentworth? He's got the strongest motive." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "The motive, yes, but the method. The locked room, the silent shot, these require subtlety, not brute force. Wentworth is a man of passion, not precision." As they left the library, Poirot paused by the rose garden where the wilted blooms stood as a silent accusation. "The roses, Hastings," he murmured. "They are neglected, yet the gardener was here. Someone was in this garden at a time they should not have been." Hastings shook his head, exasperated. "I still don't see what roses have to do with a murder, Poirot." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "They are a witness, mon ami. They saw someone, and they will tell us in time." The day drew to a close, the mist thickening outside Hunter's lodge. The cigarette case and the burned letter had deepened the mystery, revealing cracks in the alibis that Poirot was determined to exploit. Hastings felt the familiar thrill of the chase, tempered by the frustration of a puzzle that refused to yield. Yet Poirot's confidence was unshaken, his mind weaving the clues into a pattern only he could see. The cracks in the facade were growing, and the truth, like the roses, was waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. The oppressive atmosphere of Hunter's Lodge seemed to tighten its grip as the afternoon sun cast long, slanting rays through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like specters in the still air. Captain Hastings, seated in the drawing-room, felt the weight of the unsolved murder of Sir Reginald Harrington pressing down on him, a puzzle that grew more intricate with each passing hour. Hercule Poirot, however, stood by the fireplace, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet intensity, his green eyes scanning the assembled household with the precision of a watchmaker. The discovery of the burned letter fragment and Dr. Redfern's cigarette case had stirred the waters, and Hastings sensed that Poirot was poised to push someone to the breaking point. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning to Hastings with a faint smile. "The human heart is a fragile thing. Under pressure, it reveals its secrets. Today we apply that pressure, and we shall see who cracks." Inspector Japp, standing near the door with his notebook in hand, nodded grimly. "I'm with you, Poirot. Someone's lying, and that cigarette case puts Redfern near the study. Let's shake them up and see what falls out." Poirot raised a hand, his expression cautious but determined. "Not shake, Japp, but nudge. The truth is near, and we must coax it forth with care. Let us begin." The household was gathered once more, their faces a study in strain and suspicion. Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her silver hair framing a face pale with grief, though her eyes held a flicker of defiance. Evelyn Carter sat alone, her auburn hair catching the light, her hands clenched in her lap. Dr. Lawrence Redfern stood apart, his spectacles glinting as he avoided her gaze. Charles Wentworth paced by the window, his florid face flushed with barely contained anger, while Mrs. Clara Wentworth's pearls clicked softly as she twisted them. Miss Beatrice Lyle, the secretary, sat with her notebook, her sharp features composed but her eyes watchful. Poirot held up the burned letter fragment, its charred edges stark against his gloved fingers. Mesdames et messieurs, this fragment found in the study's fire speaks of debt and regret. It is a clue to Sir Reginald's final hours. Someone in this room knows of this letter. Perhaps wrote it. Perhaps burned it. Who will speak? A heavy silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lady Margaret's voice was soft but firm. I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I know nothing of any letter. Reginald received many documents, business matters, nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Business, madame, or something more personal? The word regret suggests a matter of the heart, a confession, perhaps a demand. Did Sir Reginald confide in you about such a matter? Lady Margaret's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. Number we. We had grown distant in recent years. He kept his troubles to himself. Poirot turned to Evelyn Carter, whose defiance seemed to waver under his gaze. Mademoiselle, you are Sir Reginald's niece, his heir. A letter about debt. Did it concern you, perhaps? An inheritance, a promise broken? Evelyn's cheeks flushed, her voice sharp. You're accusing me again, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason to harm Uncle Reginald. I didn't need his money, and I didn't see any letter. Dr. Redfern stepped forward, his voice steady but strained. Evelyn is telling the truth. I saw nothing, heard nothing. That cigarette case you found, I told you I left it in the library earlier. It's not proof of anything. Poirot's smile was polite but unrelenting. Not proof, monsieur, but a question. Why was your cigarette case in the library, so close to the study when you claimed to have been in your room? And why, Mademoiselle Carter, do you look at Dr. Redfern with such disappointment? Evelyn's eyes widened, then dropped to her lap. I don't know what you mean. Lawrence has been honest with me. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Bien, let us turn to Mr. Wentworth. Your meeting with Sir Reginald at 10. It was heated, yes? Did he mention a letter, a debt you owed him? Wentworth's face reddened, his voice rising. This is nonsense. I've told you we argued about the partnership. No letters, no debts, just business. I left him alive and Clara can vouch for me. Mrs. Wentworth's voice was cold, almost mechanical. Charles was with me after 9:45. We heard nothing, saw nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the rigidity of her posture. And you, madame, a wife knows her husband's habits. Did Mr. Wentworth leave your room at any time after 9:45? Mrs. Wentworth hesitated, her pearls stilling in her hands. Number, he was with me all night. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn Carter stood, her voice trembling with emotion. Stop it! All of you, stop lying! I can't stand this anymore. Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned to Redfern. Lawrence, tell them the truth. You weren't in your room all night, were you? Redfern's face paled, his spectacles slipping slightly. Evelyn, what are you? You know what I mean, she cried, her voice breaking. I saw you in the hall near the library after 11. You said you were fetching a book, but you were gone too long. What were you doing? The room erupted in gasps. Lady, Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Wentworth froze mid-pace, and Mrs. Wentworth's pearls slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Miss Lyle's pen paused, her eyes wide. Redfern's voice was low, almost a whisper. Evelyn, I didn't want to worry you. Yes, I was in the library, but only for a moment. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. Précisément. A crack in the façade, mes amis. Dr. Redfern, you were near the study at 11, yet you did not mention this before. Why? Redfern's jaw tightened. It wasn't relevant. I didn't want to complicate things. I swear I had nothing to do with Sir Reginald's death. Evelyn sank back into her seat, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to believe anymore. Poirot turned to the group, his voice calm but commanding. The truth is emerging, mesdames et messieurs. One of you burned a letter. One of you moved a key. One of you fired a shot that no one heard. And now, one of you is broken. Who will be next? The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like a shroud. Hastings watched, his heart pounding as the suspects exchanged glances. Some fearful, some defiant, some unreadable. Miss Lyle's pen resumed its scratching, but her hand trembled. Lady Margaret's composure seemed to fray, her eyes darting to the door. Wentworth's fists clenched, and Mrs. Wentworth stared at her husband with an intensity that unsettled Hastings. After the group dispersed, Poirot led Hastings and Japp to the study, where he examined the fireplace once more. The letter, Hastings, he said, his voice low. It was burned to hide a truth, but it has revealed another. Dr. Redfern was near the study, and Miss Carter's outburst. She knows more than she says. Japp nodded, his eyes narrowing. Redfern's our man, I'd bet on it. That cigarette case, his late-night wandering, he's got some explaining to do. Poirot's smile was patient. Perhaps, Japp, but the truth is not so simple. The letter, the key, the roses, these are connected, and they point to a mind most cunning. Hastings, still reeling from Evelyn's outburst, gestured to the fireplace. What about Evelyn? She seemed genuinely upset. Could she be involved? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Her emotion was real, Hastings, but emotion can mask as well as reveal. We must watch her closely, and Dr. Redfern. The breaking point has come, and the truth is near. As dusk fell over Hunter's Lodge, the mist thickened, cloaking the estate in an eerie silence. The cracks in the alibis were widening, and Hastings knew that Poirot was closing in on the killer. The mystery, like the roses in the garden, was beginning to yield its secrets, and the truth was waiting to be plucked.